Hi, I'm G. Welcome back to my art channel, and today I'm showing you how to draw this fuchsia flower in pencil. So you'll need a photo reference, that's the one I'm using, and I'll pop a link to that in the description below. And you'll also need a pencil, and if you're me, you're going to need some glasses. I'm working on a piece of paper which is 13 by 13 centimeters square, and the first thing you can see me doing is I plot the location of the widest petals. So the petals that are widest on the left and the right, I plot the location of those, and you also see me draw a line sort of through the very middle of the square, and that's my line that's going to separate the top petals from the petals that are all bunching out and popping out at the bottom. And then you can see me start to draw the kind of bell shape of the part of the flower that holds all the petals, the bit that hangs down and is attached by a stalk. There you go, you see a point to it there. And I'm just getting that kind of bell shape drawn in very, very lightly, and then the sort of secondary kind of bulbous bell shape that comes on top of that as well. I'm just sketching those out, and those are pretty much coming down the very center of this square that I'm drawing within. And I decided to add a little bit of definition to the shape because it is the center of the picture, or the sort of middle, and so that's going to help me sort of work outwards from there. And what you can see me doing is plotting how I'm going to do the big petals, those 4 big petals that have unfolded and are curling upwards. So you can see me start to do that one that's facing us right now with a very, very sort of sharp kind of triangular point. So I'm just gently using the pencil to sort of like move upwards. Then I'm looking at how high that petal is going to be, and it's sort of in line with the top of the bell shape. So I just put a little bit of line in there so I know how high that petal is going to be, and then I start bringing down the side, and I'm going to curl that over and under, join it all together, and that's one of those petals. And again, this is one of the first petals I draw, so this is going to help me now plot the other petals and the location of the other petals. So I'm happy with the way this petal's looking, and I'm going to use this one and the rest of what I've drawn to help me draw the petal next to it. So you can see me having a look at it, looking at how maybe thick it's going to be, and the curve of this petal as it curls over. And I'm going to use what I've drawn to really help me get this right. So look, the point of that first petal goes up on a diagonal, and that's going to help me find the top of the petal I'm drawing. I also trace a line there from the top of that green bit over to the top of this petal. Put a little dot there, and I know that that is where those lines have sort of converged, the height of this petal, how high this curling petal is going to come upwards and almost over the top of the first one that I've drawn. And you'll see me do that a lot as the drawing progresses. I'm constantly looking at the photo, looking for those invisible lines, those lines that will help me figure out how high, how wide, or how long some other shape in the picture needs to be. And I say they're invisible because they're only really there if you kind of look for the way that these lines sort of converge. Well, that's 2 of those big petals done, and now I've got to get the other 2 done. So you see me, I'm focusing on this one that sort of curls out from behind the bell shape and upwards, and it also goes behind a green leaf in the background. So again, I'm just looking for some of the lines that help me figure out how wide it's going to be, and then I sort of move that pencil line just gently upwards and flick it upwards because I know it's going to be covered by the leaf that I decided to put in the background. I also take this moment to just put in the stalk that the fuchsia is hanging from. And then I get a little bit fussy, just adding some extra definition to bits that don't really need it that I've drawn so far. Just getting a little bit distracted, I think, before I decide to do that 4th big petal at the top. Just, a couple of extra little bits of lines. So I'm looking at this one, and there you go. I can see the top of that first one that I drew, and it means that the other one is a bit lower than it, so that helps me figure out how high that petal is going to be. Yeah, it's in line with the sort of bit where the red bell shape becomes the green bell shape. So I've got a good idea about how high it's got to be, and also I plotted how wide it's got to be. So now I've just got to make sure that I get the curl shape. Because you can see part of that petal twisting over. So I've got to try and make sure that I get my lines right here to give it that kind of 3D idea that the petal is twisting slightly. And that's even before I start painting it with the colours and so on that I'm going to do later. So I'm trying to draw it with a kind of 3D quality before I even worry about painting it. So you might have noticed that I've made this drawing slightly more difficult for myself because I'm right-handed, and I decided to do the petals on the right-hand side of the page first and then have to work back to do the ones on the left. So I've got to be careful about where I put my hand and rest my hand on the paper as I'm trying to finish this petal on the left-hand side. Otherwise I'm going to smudge all of the work that I've already done. So maybe I should have thought a little bit harder about that before I started on the right hand side. Here you can see that I look at the tops of the petals and I think that one's got to be a little bit higher, a little bit longer, pointier, a bit more delicate. So I just make a quick minor adjustment to that other petal, and then I start getting fussy with the shape of the bell shapes in the middle again. And I don't know why I'm doing that, possibly just a bit of a confidence booster. But there you see me use the eraser on the back of the pencil to just erase a few of those lines. And that's the first time in, 3 or 4 minutes of drawing that I've actually used the eraser. And that's how I approach a lot of my drawings. I like to draw nice and light, nice and sketchy, so that I don't have to, waste time with the eraser before I move on to the rest of the drawing. So I do a little bit more defining some shapes, just kind of putting off working on those bottom petals. But now I'm going to get into them. So I'm looking at the shapes, I'm tracing the shapes with my pencil, I'm thinking, right, okay, I've got to start drawing these in. And actually on this time, I start on the left-hand side. So you can see me looking again at the photograph and trying to judge how wide this kind of bowl of petals hanging down at the bottom is going to be. So I think I've managed to judge the left and the right okay. And now I'm looking at putting the sort of gaps in between to draw these individual petal shapes. So you can see me just tracing that line down from the center, nice curling round line. And then I'm looking at the other shapes and looking at, right, how thick are these? Is there a line in the middle? Does this petal kind of split into two? And that's what you can see me tracing there. And then looking at just adding that kind of curved bottom, curving off the edge, and then bringing the side up again to make that petal a little bit thicker. And yeah, you can see I'm tracing a line there, so I can see that if that petal was to continue through the flower, it would join the line of that big petal above it. So that helps me figure out if I'm on the right line, so whether I got it wide enough or whether it needs to be a bit narrower. So as I'm moving on to the next one, I can see that there's a gap between the two petals where the purple colour is very, very dark and shadowed. So that's what you can see me sketching in now. That's the gap between the two petals before I curl the bottom of the petal under and start bringing up the side. So it comes upwards, then it kind of bulges and gets a bit fatter. And yeah, absolutely, it's in line with the side of that bell shape. So I sort of trace that down with my pencil. That gives me a very, very faint line that I can work towards, and this petal sort of like moves that way, curves up and meets that line. So here you can see me plot this very small petal and trying to figure out how far down that little petal is going to come. So I've looked at the photo, looked at the other petals, so I think it's going to be about this, almost kind of like half the length of the other petals that you can see. And that then also helps me draw this bigger, longest petal that is hanging down in the middle. And again, I use the petals that I've already drawn to judge how long and how far hanging down this petal needs to go. And it's about this point in the drawing where I'm starting to feel quite confident about the way it's going. I've got 3/4 of the flower drawn in, and I'm like, okay, this is going all right. Keep it light, keep it, sketchy. And then I notice I've missed a little bit over here down at the bottom. So I'm like, right, I've got to go and just quickly sketch that little bit in as well, because if I don't do it now, I'll probably do the rest of the flower and forget that bit. So once I notice it, I got to do it. And here you can see me just put in the petals that are at the background. They're going to be shadowed. And they are in the sort of background, not the foreground. So I'm just trying to sketch that one in so you'll be able to see that one in between the ones in the foreground. Now I'm looking towards the petals on this right hand side, so this big fat one, and again I'm looking at a line that I can trace down from the bell shape and bring it through that other petal, and then I can sort of tuck that down and I'll be able to figure out how thick and how wide this big petal has to be. Now I'm looking at how far down it comes, so I'm drawing a little diagonal up from the longest petal, so I know that this other one is going to be a bit shorter, but I've also got the idea of how wide it is because those two little guidelines that I've already put in. So that makes it drawing it a little bit easier. There is a couple of little kinks in that petal, so you can see me just trace those in, get those sketched in as well. But that one's coming down, and that takes up a nice big chunk of space on this side of the picture. And now I take the opportunity to draw that other petal, that dark purple petal you can see in the background that's in shade. So I just have a look at how long that's going to be, so I can see that's shorter than the one that I've just drawn. So I put a little guideline to help me that. And then bring down that shape, draw it, curve it at the bottom, and I know that that one's going to be in shadow when I get around to painting it. So I'm ready to do this last section of petals, and you can see as I circle them there, these are thinner. And there's some slightly more complicated lines and shapes within there. So I've just had a look at one of them that's got a bit of an edge and a shadow. So I'm just trying to sketch that shape in first of all. And I know it's going to be, again, shorter than the ones I've already drawn. So I pop a little guideline upwards diagonally from those. So I know it's going to be shorter. But I'm just trying to sketch the overall shape of the petal, but then I can also see that there's a few lines inside of it where it changes between being really pale pink to being a little bit darker. So I'm going to have to make sure I sketch those in, and I'm sketching these last two petals. As they curve around, they're getting thinner and thinner and thinner because they're getting further away from you. So these petals on the edge that I've got to draw, got to make sure that those go thinner to give you that, that 3D effect that, oh, these petals are curving away from you. So again, trying to get the 3D drawing right before I even try and do anything with the paint. So it's looking all right, but the bit that I'm going to have a bit of problems here is the little hanging down polleny stameny bits from inside of the fuchsia, because I haven't, with my 13 by 13 centimeter square, haven't really got enough room to show that longest one that is hanging down. So I'm going to have to make some artistic adjustments here to draw these. I think they're called the stamens. Please correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. So they sort of drop down and curl down from inside the actual center of the flower. So I can draw most of the ones that are on the photo in their normal places, which is what you can see me doing now. But like I say, I have to make an artistic adjustment with this one, and I decide I'm going to move it a little bit over towards the right hand side. And of course I'm going to have to make it shorter as well, because otherwise it would be hanging off the bottom of this square that I've decided to paint within, and you wouldn't be able to see that kind of like fuzzy little orange blob that hangs on the end of that. Almost looks like a little pink string or a little pink piece of spaghetti. So here you can see I'm moving it over towards the right hand side. Possibly not the absolute bestest solution. Maybe if I'd had a look at this beforehand, I could have shoved the flower upwards a little bit, so I'd have enough room for that one, but I'm okay with it. It's nice to use a photo for reference, but it's also nice to not slavishly just completely copy and follow it, and to put in a few little ideas and adjustments of your own. And with the fuchsia flower and its petals all pretty much drawn at this point, my attention is going to turn to the background, and I want the flower to really pop out from the background. So when I'm looking at the background, I'm going to do it deliberately, really kind of rough, really sketchy, very, very simple, not too detailed. So the first thing you should be able to see is where I'm holding the pencil as I begin to sketch in the background. I'm holding it much more mid-barrel, and what that will help me do is just put in some gestural kind of lines without going in really heavily and without trying to add too much definition and detail to the leaves that are in the background. So it's going to keep it hopefully a bit loose, a bit basic, and a bit more kind of just like expressive of shapes in the background, because my idea is to do the background paler so that the really bright, lovely kind of pinky reds of the fuchsia really pop off the page. So my idea is with this background, do it really light, really gentle, without too much detail. So you can see me looking at the photograph and just filling the gaps and putting in some of the bigger leaves first of all, and then you can see me just try and plot some of the smaller shapes that you can see coming out in front of those leaves or disappearing behind those leaves, and it really just ends up making a whole load of very, very abstract kind of just like line shapes in the background. And I'm kind of hoping that when I paint it, that's what it's going to look like. Yes, you'll have an idea that it's leaves in the background, but that it's not going to be, completely super detailed. Like I'm not going to put in the veins of the leaves, and I might not even emphasize the center lines of those leaves too much either. I'll just be looking for shapes of color in the background. So again, I'm holding that pencil mid-barrel so I can do lots of very, very light and gestural kind of lines here without getting too fussy. And it really is just, like I said, just filling in the gaps, adding those lines, making sure that I draw through some shapes as well, so that those leaves, match up where they disappear behind a petal and then come out behind another petal, that, they match up and those lines aren't all wonky and not going to make sense. So the next stages for this drawing, once it's finished, is to transfer it onto a piece of watercolor paper, because this is just plain white printer paper I'm drawing on at the moment. So what I'll do is I'll put this underneath some watercolor paper, I'll pop it on top of a simple light box, and I'll trace the lines of the flower, and also I'll trace the lines of the leaves in the background, but I won't trace with a normal pencil. I'll use watercolor pencil. So that when I start to paint it in watercolor, I won't get those gray pencil lines forming the edges. The watercolor pencils will blend in with the color that I'm adding, and I'll get a pure color piece of work where the outlines are in color, not in graphite pencil. And with a close-up on the finished drawing here, you can see that I've actually added some very, very simple areas of shading before I lightbox, before I trace this. So I know clearly which petals are in the foreground and which of those petals are going to be background petals. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, because if you subscribe you won't miss my next video, which here is a little sneak peek of me actually painting the fuchsia in watercolour paints. Thanks for watching.